The most dangerous master is the one who no longer cares whether anyone calls him a master. Princess Alara Voss first heard those words as a child, tucked away in a forgotten chapter of imperial history that no one seemed to take seriously anymore. Years later, standing beneath the crystal arches of the Grand Arrival Hall, she found herself remembering that sentence for reasons she could not explain. The request had been simple. The Arkan Empire had reached out to Earth and asked for a Swordmaster. Not a politician, not a diplomat, not a military advisor. A Swordmaster. The Empire was preparing for a ceremonial season unlike any in generations, and Alara wanted someone who embodied the discipline, wisdom, and tradition humanity was famous for. She expected a legend. Someone tall, confident, and unmistakably impressive. Someone whose reputation would enter the room before they did. Instead, when the human transport finally settled onto the landing platform, the massive doors opened and silence spread through the hall. One man stepped forward. He looked old. Not distinguished old. Not regal old. Just old. His silver hair rested neatly above a weathered face. His posture was relaxed. His clothing was plain. He carried no grand symbol of rank and wore no decoration that suggested greatness. If anything, he looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong ship by accident. Murmurs spread through the gathered nobles almost immediately. Alara heard them despite herself. Was this really the human representative? Was there some mistake? Had Earth misunderstood the request? The old man slowly descended the ramp without appearing to notice the thousands of eyes fixed upon him. Every movement seemed unhurried. He neither rushed nor hesitated. He simply walked as if nothing around him demanded his attention. Alara exchanged a glance with her chief advisor. The expression she received in return reflected her own disappointment. This was not what she had imagined. The announcement system activated. Representative from Earth, the voice declared. Natan Hade. That was all. No list of achievements. No collection of titles. No honors. Just a name. The reaction among the assembled court grew even more puzzled. In the Arkan Empire, important people accumulated titles the way stars gathered light. Even junior officials often required introductions lasting several minutes. Yet this human arrived with nothing but two ordinary words. Nathan Hale reached the foot of the platform and stopped. For a moment, he simply observed the hall. His eyes moved across the towering columns, the banners of noble houses, and the elevated throne where Princess Alara stood waiting. There was no awe in his expression, no nervousness, no excitement. He looked at the imperial palace the same way another traveler might look at a quiet park. That, more than anything, unsettled Alara. Most visitors reacted somehow. They admired the architecture. They respected the history. They acknowledged the significance of standing before the future ruler of one of the largest powers in known space. Nathan Hale did none of those things. He merely looked. Then he smiled faintly, as if recognizing an old pattern. The silence stretched longer than protocol allowed. Finally, Alara stepped forward. "Welcome to Arkan," she said. "We are honored by Earth's response to our request." The old man nodded once. "Appreciate the invitation." That was it. No speech. No formal greeting. No attempt to impress anyone. Around the hall, nobles exchanged shocked looks. Yet strangely, Nathan Hale seemed completely unaware that he had violated every expectation in the room. Or perhaps he was aware and simply did not care. As the whispers grew louder, Alara felt an unexpected curiosity replacing her disappointment. Because for the first time in her life, she had met someone standing in her presence who appeared entirely immune to power. And although she did not realize it yet, that simple fact was about to change everything. The people who feared losing authority were usually the ones who worked hardest to display it. Princess Alara had learned that lesson years ago, but Nathan Hale seemed determined to teach it again in ways she had never expected. Less than an hour after the arrival ceremony ended, the imperial court gathered for the traditional welcome banquet. Attendance was not optional. Visiting dignitaries were expected to participate, exchange formal greetings, and demonstrate respect for Arkan customs. Every ambassador understood the importance of the event. Every military representative understood it. Every royal guest understood it. Nathan Hale apparently did not. Alara sat at the head of the long crystal table while nobles, ministers, and advisors filled their assigned seats. One place remained empty, the seat reserved for the human guest. The hall doors finally opened several minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Nathan entered carrying a small cup of coffee. He did not appear rushed. He did not appear apologetic. He looked perfectly comfortable. Several nobles stared in disbelief. One minister nearly dropped his data tablet. Nathan calmly took his seat and nodded toward Alara. I found a balcony with a good view. The room became so quiet that even the environmental systems seemed loud. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Alara had spent her entire life surrounded by people who carefully measured every word spoken in her presence. Yet this human behaved as though he were attending a casual gathering among friends. Strangely, she found herself more curious than offended. Throughout the banquet, the pattern continued. Nathan ignored political games. He ignored attempts to impress him. When one noble spent several minutes describing his family lineage, Nathan listened politely and then asked whether the noble enjoyed his work. The question seemed to confuse the man. Another advisor described economic achievements across multiple star systems. Nathan responded by asking what ordinary citizens thought about those policies. Again, nobody seemed prepared for the question. The conversation kept drifting away from status and back toward people. Alara noticed something else as well. Nathan never tried to dominate a discussion. He rarely spoke unless someone addressed him directly. Yet whenever he did speak, the entire table listened. It made no sense. By every visible measure, he should have been the least important person in the room. Instead, attention seemed to follow him naturally. After the banquet concluded, Alara requested a private audience. Nathan accepted without hesitation. They met inside one of the palace gardens, overlooking the illuminated capital city. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon beneath a sky crowded with distant stars. "You are unusual," Alara said directly. Nathan smiled. "I have been called worse. Most people spend their lives trying to gain influence. That sounds exhausting. You do not seem interested in influence at all." Nathan took a slow sip from his coffee before answering. "Influence is useful when you need something. Eventually, if life goes well, you stop needing quite so much." The answer frustrated her because it felt simple and profound at the same time. "Do you know how many leaders requested the position you were given?" she asked. "Probably a lot. And that does not interest you?" "No, what?" Nathan looked toward the city lights. For the first time, a faint trace of age appeared in his expression. Not weakness, experience, the kind earned through decades. "Because I learned a long time ago that being important and being useful are not always the same thing." Alara found herself unable to answer immediately. The statement lingered in her thoughts. Before she could continue, a palace officer approached from a pathway. The officer stopped several feet away and appeared unusually nervous. "Your Highness," he said, "a message has arrived from the human embassy." "What message?" Alara asked. The officer glanced toward Nathan before speaking. They requested confirmation that Mr. Hale arrived safely. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "That seems normal." The officer swallowed. "Not exactly, sir." "Why not?" The officer hesitated. "Because the message was signed by the Human Council, 3 fleet commanders, and the President of Earth." For the first time that day, Nathan Hale looked mildly annoyed. "I told them not to do that." Alara stared at him. The officer stared at him. Neither knew what to say next. And for the first time since his arrival, Princess Alara began to suspect that the old man sitting beside her was hiding something far larger than anyone had imagined. By the next morning, the story had spread through the palace. Nobody knew exactly why the leadership of Earth had personally confirmed Nathan Hale's arrival, but everyone had an opinion. Some claimed he must be a retired statesman. Others suggested he had once advised presidents. A few believed it was simply a gesture of respect toward an elderly citizen. None of the explanations felt satisfying. Princess Alara spent much of the morning reviewing official records, hoping to find answers through ordinary channels. The results only deepened the mystery. Nathan Hale's public file was surprisingly small. Birthplace, education, a handful of ceremonial recognitions, several decades of service listed in broad terms with very few details attached. Entire sections appeared summarized into single sentences. For someone who had attracted attention from Earth's highest leaders, the record felt strangely incomplete. It was as if important chapters had been deliberately compressed into footnotes. Determined to learn more, Alara invited Nathan to observe a training exhibition that afternoon. The event had been planned months in advance. Members of the Imperial Academy would demonstrate discipline, coordination, and technical mastery before representatives from across the Empire. It was precisely the type of ceremony a visiting Swordmaster was expected to appreciate. Nathan arrived on time, carrying the same coffee cup she had seen the day before. He took a seat near the front and quietly watched the proceedings begin. Young cadets performed complex routines. Veteran instructors demonstrated advanced techniques. The audience responded with admiration. Nathan responded with polite attention. Nothing more. Alara occasionally glanced toward him, searching for some sign of excitement or criticism. Instead, she found the same calm expression he seemed to wear everywhere. Eventually, the exhibition concluded. As guests prepared to leave, one of the Academy's senior instructors approached Nathan directly. Master Darius Wren was widely respected throughout Arkan space. He had spent 30 years training officers and advising noble families. Few people questioned his expertise. "Human," Darius said with professional courtesy, "I hope the presentation met your expectations." Nathan nodded. "The students worked hard." Darius smiled slightly. "That is kind of you to say, but I was hoping for a more detailed assessment." Nathan considered the request for a moment. "Do you really want one?" The instructor laughed. "Of course." Nathan looked toward the departing cadets. "Then I would say they spend too much time worrying about perfection." Darius blinked. "Perfection is the goal." "No, Nathan replied gently. "Improvement is the goal. Perfection is something people chase when they forget improvement exists." The nearby conversation circles fell silent. Several instructors turned toward him. Darius frowned, not offended but clearly puzzled. "You believe our standards are too high. I think your students are afraid to make mistakes." Nathan took another sip of coffee. People learn faster when they are allowed to fail occasionally. The response lingered in the air. Alara noticed something unexpected. Nobody dismissed his words. Nobody laughed. In fact, many of the instructors appeared thoughtful. A few even looked uncomfortable, as if they had heard a truth they were not ready to admit. Later that evening, Alara stood on a palace balcony overlooking the academy grounds. Nathan joined her without ceremony. Below them, students crossed illuminated walkways between buildings. "You have a talent for making people reconsider things," she said. Nathan chuckled softly. "Usually they just argue." Master Darius did not argue. That is because he is wise enough to listen. Alara studied him carefully. "Who are you really?" Nathan looked out toward the city. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. "Just an old man trying not to become a stubborn one." It sounded like another simple answer. Yet somehow it felt incomplete. And as the lights of the capital stretched across the horizon, Princess Alara became increasingly certain that every answer Nathan Hale gave concealed a much larger story beneath it. 3 days after Nathan Hale arrived on Arkan, Princess Alara noticed something she could no longer dismiss as coincidence. Every human who entered the palace reacted to him the same way. It did not matter whether they were diplomats, engineers, merchants, or embassy staff. The moment they saw Nathan, their posture subtly changed. Some smiled with genuine warmth. Others became unexpectedly respectful. A few even appeared nervous. Yet none of them treated him like an ordinary retiree. The pattern became impossible to ignore during a reception held for visiting interstellar delegates. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Celestial Hall. The event was intended to strengthen diplomatic relationships and showcase the influence of the Arkan Empire. Nathan had accepted the invitation only after Alara insisted. Predictably, he spent most of the evening standing near a refreshment table, speaking with maintenance workers instead of dignitaries. Alara watched from across the room. At first, she found the behavior amusing. Then something unusual happened. A newly arrived human delegation entered the hall. Leading them was Ambassador Rebecca Carter, one of Earth's most senior diplomatic officials. Even Alara recognized her reputation. Carter was known throughout several sectors as a skilled negotiator trusted with humanity's most delicate relationships. The moment she spotted Nathan, she immediately changed direction. Conversations paused as she crossed the room. Several foreign representatives assumed she was approaching Princess Alara. Instead, she walked directly to Nathan. Then, to the surprise of nearly everyone present, she offered him the same level of respect normally reserved for heads of state. Nathan looked mildly embarrassed. "Rebecca," he said, "good to see you." The ambassador smiled. "Sir, it is good to see you too." "Sir." The word immediately captured Alara's attention, not because of the title itself, but because of the sincerity behind it. Carter sounded less like a diplomat greeting a civilian and more like a student greeting a teacher. Their conversation remained brief. Nathan asked about her family. She asked about his health. The exchange seemed ordinary. Yet after Carter departed, several human officials approached one after another. Every interaction followed the same pattern. Respect, familiarity, admiration. None of it made sense. Later that evening, Alara finally confronted Ambassador Carter in private. "I hope you do not mind a question," Alara said. Carter smiled. "Not at all. Why does every human seem to know Nathan Hale?" For the first time, the ambassador hesitated. The reaction alone told Alara she had touched something important. "Know him?" Carter repeated. "That is difficult to answer. Try." Carter considered her words carefully. "Imagine there was a person from your world's history whose influence quietly touched thousands of lives. Someone who never sought recognition, but shaped events anyway. Eventually, people stop discussing that person publicly because everyone assumes their importance is already understood." Alara frowned. "You are describing a historical figure." "Perhaps. Nathan is alive." Carter's smile widened slightly. "That is what makes him unusual." Before Alara could continue, the ambassador politely excused herself. The answer raised more questions than it resolved. That night, unable to sleep, Alara accessed a restricted historical archive. She entered Nathan Hale's name once again. Thousands of results appeared. Most were inaccessible. Entire categories carried authorization levels beyond her clearance. That alone was astonishing. She was the future ruler of a galactic empire. Very little information was normally hidden from her. Yet here, she sat staring at page after page of sealed records connected to a man who spent his mornings drinking coffee and feeding birds in the palace gardens. One entry briefly appeared before disappearing behind a security barrier. Alara caught only a fragment. Human Advisory Council Archive. Founding member. She leaned closer to the screen. Founding member of what? Before she could investigate further, the system locked the file completely. Alara sat back in silence. The mystery surrounding Nathan Hale was no longer merely interesting. It was becoming impossible, because the more she learned about him, the less an ordinary explanation seemed possible. The following morning, Princess Alara abandoned every official method of investigation. If the formal archives refused to answer her questions, she would search elsewhere. Deep beneath the palace complex existed a historical repository rarely visited by anyone outside the imperial family. Unlike government databases, it contained personal journals, diplomatic observations, and records gathered over centuries from thousands of civilizations. The information was imperfect, sometimes contradictory, but it often preserved details that official histories ignored. Alara spent hours reviewing references connected to humanity. Most contained familiar topics: trade agreements, exploration missions, cultural exchanges. Then she found something unexpected. A recurring phrase appeared across documents spanning nearly 50 years. The phrase was never explained. It simply appeared in passing remarks from ambassadors, governors, and military observers. They referred to someone called the Quiet Advisor. One document described a negotiation that had prevented a major political crisis. Another mentioned a planetary reconstruction effort after a natural disaster. A third referred to a dispute between rival colonies that had somehow ended peacefully after the arrival of an unnamed consultant. In every case, the same phrase appeared somewhere in the report. The quiet advisor was present. Alara narrowed the search. Hundreds of references appeared. Strangely, no document identified the person directly. Yet a pattern emerged. Whenever the phrase appeared, impossible situations seemed to become manageable. Long-standing disputes reached compromise. Opponents found common ground. Entire regions changed direction without anyone fully understanding how. It sounded less like the work of a commander and more like the work of a teacher. Later that afternoon, Alara found Nathan sitting beside a small fountain in the palace gardens. Several children from visiting diplomatic families had gathered around him. He was showing them how to fold pieces of paper into simple shapes. The future ruler of a galactic empire paused several yards away and simply watched. The scene looked almost absurd. This was the man connected to restricted archives, sealed records, and personal messages from Earth's highest leaders. Yet he seemed perfectly content spending an hour teaching children how to create paper birds. One young girl proudly held up her finished creation. Nathan smiled as though she had accomplished something extraordinary. The expression on his face caught Alara by surprise. It was genuine, completely free of performance or calculation. When the children finally left, Nathan noticed her standing nearby. "Good afternoon, Princess. You are difficult to investigate." Nathan laughed. "That sounds like an unusual compliment. I found references to someone called the Quiet Advisor." The smile remained on his face, but something changed behind his eyes. Not fear, recognition. "Did you?" he asked. "Do you know the title?" "I have heard it before. Was it yours?" Nathan leaned back against the fountain. People create titles when they need simple explanations. That is not an answer. Most honest answers are not. Alara sighed. Speaking with Nathan often felt like chasing sunlight across water. Every answer revealed something while hiding something else. "Why are so many records sealed?" she asked. Nathan was silent for several seconds. "Because some stories belong to many people, not one person. You could simply tell me." "I could." "Then why do you not?" Nathan looked toward the distant skyline of the capital. "Because if someone spends their entire life explaining who they were, they eventually stop paying attention to who they are becoming." The statement lingered in the air between them. Before Alara could respond, a palace communications officer hurried into the garden. The officer's expression was unusually tense. "Your Highness," he said, "an urgent transmission has arrived from the outer sectors." Alara immediately turned serious. "What happened?" "Several neighboring systems have reported unexpected fleet movements near major trade routes." Nathan's relaxed posture did not change. Yet for the first time since arriving on Arkin, he slowly set down his coffee. The movement was subtle, almost insignificant, but something about it made Alara's instincts sharpen. Because after days of complete calm, Nathan Hale suddenly looked like a man paying very close attention. Within an hour, the palace had shifted from curiosity to concern. Reports continued arriving from the outer sectors. None of them described open conflict. None of them reported attacks. Yet the pattern itself was unsettling. Commercial routes were experiencing unusual traffic disruptions. Independent observers noted coordinated fleet movements near several strategic corridors. Governments that normally shared information had suddenly become quiet. Individually, each event might have meant nothing. Together, they suggested something larger. Princess Alara convened an emergency advisory session inside the Strategic Council chamber. Military officers, diplomats, economic analysts, and intelligence specialists filled the circular room. Holographic maps hovered above the central table, displaying dozens of star systems connected by glowing trade lanes. Nathan Hale sat near the far end of the chamber with a cup of coffee resting beside him. He had not requested a seat. Someone had simply placed one there for him. Alara noticed that several senior advisors occasionally glanced in his direction, even though he had not spoken a single word since entering the room. The briefing continued for nearly an hour. Experts presented theories. Some believed a regional power was conducting exercises. Others suspected economic pressure tactics. A few argued the reports were unrelated coincidences. Every explanation sounded plausible, yet none of them fully explained the pattern. Eventually, Alara turned toward Nathan. "You have been unusually quiet." A few heads around the table nodded in agreement. Nathan studied the star map for several moments before answering. "Because everybody here is trying to identify what is happening. And you are not?" Alara asked. "No." The room fell silent. "Then what are you trying to identify?" Nathan asked a simple question. "Who benefits if everyone becomes nervous?" Several advisors exchanged glances. The question immediately shifted the discussion. Instead of focusing on fleet locations, they began examining political consequences, economic forecasts, diplomatic tensions, public reactions. Within minutes, entirely new possibilities emerged. Alara watched the process unfold with growing fascination. Nathan had not provided an answer. He had simply asked a better question. The meeting ended several hours later. No final conclusion was reached, but the atmosphere had changed. For the first time, people seemed to be examining the situation from a broader perspective. As advisors departed, Alara remained behind. Nathan was preparing to leave when she stopped him. "How did you know the discussion was heading in the wrong direction?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Because people usually look at events before they look at incentives." "You make it sound simple." "Most important things are simple. They're just not easy." They walked together through one of the palace corridors overlooking the capital. Evening lights stretched across the city below like rivers of gold. For a while, neither spoke. Then Alara asked the question that had occupied her thoughts for days. "Have you dealt with situations like this before?" Nathan looked out toward the horizon. "More times than I can count. As a diplomat? Sometimes. As an advisor? Occasionally." "Then what were you most often?" Nathan laughed quietly. "A student." Alara frowned. "You expect me to believe that?" The moment somebody thinks they understand everything is usually the moment they stop understanding anything. Before she could respond, her communicator activated. An incoming priority transmission appeared on the display. The source surprised her. It originated from a human fleet operating several sectors away. She accepted the message immediately. A uniformed officer appeared above the device. "Your Highness, we are forwarding an official update. Multiple human vessels have adjusted course toward nearby transit regions." Alara's expression hardened. "For what purpose?" The officer hesitated. "The official explanation is precautionary observation." "Official explanation?" The officer glanced away briefly. "Yes, Your Highness." Alara noticed something unusual. The officer was not looking at her anymore. He was looking past the camera, looking at someone standing nearby. A second later, Nathan's communicator emitted a soft notification tone. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "I was hoping they would not do that." The officer immediately straightened. "Apologies, sir." "Sir." Again. The transmission ended moments later. Alara slowly turned toward Nathan. Human fleets were changing course. Senior officers were treating him with extraordinary respect. Governments monitored his movements. Archives concealed his history. Yet the man standing beside her still carried himself like a retired traveler who preferred quiet gardens and coffee. For the first time since his arrival, Alara began wondering if the mystery surrounding Nathan Hale was not about who he had been. Perhaps the real question was why so many powerful people still listened when he spoke. 2 days later, the uncertainty that had been spreading through nearby sectors finally produced an answer, although not the one anyone expected. A diplomatic vessel from the Varen Collective arrived, without warning, at the edge of Arkan space. The Collective was known for caution. Its leaders rarely acted quickly and almost never traveled personally. Yet this ship carried one of their highest-ranking envoys. Princess Alara received the delegation inside a private conference chamber overlooking the Eastern Gardens. Senior advisors attended. Several intelligence officers remained on standby. Nathan Hale was present as well, seated near a window with his usual cup of coffee. The meeting began formally enough. Trade concerns were discussed. Navigation issues were reviewed. Regional tensions were mentioned. Then the Varen envoy paused in the middle of the sentence. His eyes had drifted toward Nathan. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time since entering the room, the envoy appeared genuinely surprised. He stared for several seconds before speaking again. I was not informed that he was here. The chamber fell silent. Alara immediately noticed the change in tone. The envoy was no longer speaking as a representative addressing a foreign ruler. He sounded like someone who had unexpectedly encountered a figure from history. You know him? Alara asked. The envoy slowly nodded. Not personally. His gaze never left Nathan. But I know of him. Nathan sighed. That usually means trouble. Several advisors exchanged confused looks. Alara leaned forward. Explain. The envoy hesitated. About 40 years ago, my government faced a political crisis that threatened to divide 3 neighboring systems. Negotiations failed repeatedly. Every attempt collapsed. Then a human advisor arrived. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, as if already regretting where the conversation was heading. The advisor stayed for 6 days. The envoy continued. He spoke with officials, workers, educators, business leaders, and community representatives. Then he left. What happened? Alara asked. The crisis ended. The room remained quiet. How? Nobody knows exactly. The envoy actually smiled. That was the remarkable part. There was no grand speech, no public announcement, no demand for recognition. People simply began cooperating again. Alara turned toward Nathan. That was you. Nathan shrugged. A lot of people did the hard work. You keep saying things like that, Alara replied, as if you were merely passing through events that everyone else remembers. Nathan offered no answer. The envoy continued speaking. Among the Varen, stories spread about the human who solved problems without seeking credit. Some called him a strategist. Others called him a teacher. A few believed he was something else entirely. Something else? Alara asked. A reminder. The answer surprised everyone in the room. The envoy folded his hands together. Many leaders become trapped by power. They begin protecting positions instead of solving problems. The human reminded people why those positions existed in the first place. Alara glanced toward Nathan once again. For the first time, the pieces were beginning to align. Not completely. Not enough to explain the sealed records or the attention from Earth's leadership, but enough to reveal part of the truth. Nathan's influence had never come from authority. It came from trust accumulated over decades, perhaps generations. After the meeting concluded, the envoy approached Nathan privately before departing. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet when it ended, the envoy bowed his head with visible respect. Hours later, standing alone on a balcony beneath the evening stars, Alara replayed the encounter in her mind. Everywhere she looked, the same pattern emerged. Governments respected him. Diplomats remembered him. Military officers listened to him. Ordinary citizens seemed comfortable around him. And yet Nathan Hale possessed none of the symbols usually associated with power. No title, no office, no visible command. The realization sent a chill through her thoughts. Perhaps the most influential human in the room was also the one who no longer needed anyone to acknowledge it. The answer arrived from Earth 7 days later. Princess Alara had not requested it. In fact, she suspected someone on the human side had decided that enough secrecy had already surrounded Nathan Hale. The message came through official diplomatic channels and carried authorization levels that bypassed nearly every restriction she had previously encountered. Even before opening the file, she understood something significant was about to change. The document contained no dramatic headlines, no declarations of heroism, no list of victories. Instead, it began with a simple statement. History is often shaped by people who never intended to shape it. Alara continued reading. Decades earlier, during a period of rapid expansion throughout human space, Earth had faced a challenge few historians discussed openly. Humanity had spread faster than its institutions could adapt. New colonies emerged. New governments formed. Cultural differences widened. Communication delays complicated decision-making. Humanity remained united in principle, but practical reality was becoming increasingly fragmented. Rather than relying solely on politicians or military leaders, Earth created an experimental advisory network. The organization recruited educators, negotiators, scientists, philosophers, engineers, community leaders, and experienced problem solvers from every walk of life. Their purpose was simple: travel where needed, listen before speaking, help communities solve problems before those problems became crises. Nathan Hale had been among the founding members. Alara sat motionless as she read further. The program never sought public attention. Its success depended on trust rather than authority. Advisors possessed no power to issue commands. They could only persuade, teach, and connect people who had stopped listening to one another. Most participants eventually retired. Many moved into academic or diplomatic careers. Nathan remained active longer than almost anyone expected. File after file documented his involvement across dozens of worlds. Not as a ruler, not as a commander, as a mentor, a mediator, a teacher. The records described situations that had seemed impossible until someone convinced opposing sides to start speaking again. Again and again, Nathan's name appeared near moments where divisions narrowed and cooperation returned. Yet what struck Alara most was not the scale of his influence. It was the consistency of his choices. Every report contained opportunities for recognition. Every report showed chances to claim credit. He accepted none of them. By the time she finished reading, the sun had disappeared beyond the horizon. The palace windows reflected the lights of the capital below. For several minutes, she simply sat in silence. Then she noticed a final attachment: personal observations submitted by senior human officials over the years. Most were brief. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Sometimes the wording changed slightly, but the message remained the same. When Nathan Hale arrives, people remember what matters. Alara closed the file and immediately went searching for him. She found Nathan exactly where she should have expected, sitting in the garden beside the fountain, watching water ripple beneath evening lights. "I read the records," she said. Nathan nodded without surprise. "Then somebody finally opened the archives. You helped shape entire regions of human space." "A lot of people did. You were a founding member of one of the most influential advisory programs in human history." Nathan smiled faintly. "That sounds much more impressive than it felt." Alara shook her head. "You still refuse to acknowledge what you accomplished." "No, Nathan replied gently. I simply remember how many others accomplished it with me." The answer somehow explained everything. Not because it revealed his history, but because it revealed his character. The mystery surrounding Nathan Hale had never been hidden behind classified files. It had been hidden behind humility. Most people spent their lives trying to become important. Nathan had spent his life trying to become useful. And somewhere along the way, usefulness had turned into a legacy so large that entire governments still paid attention whenever he entered a room. The morning Nathan Hale prepared to leave, the palace felt strangely quieter. Nothing had changed physically. The towers still gleamed beneath the rising sun. The gardens still reflected the colors of dawn. The city beyond the palace walls continued its endless motion. Yet Princess Alara sensed a difference she could not ignore. In only a few weeks, the old human had become part of the rhythm of the place. Palace staff greeted him by name. Advisors sought his perspective. Students from the academy visited the gardens, hoping to continue conversations they had started days earlier. Somehow, without authority or position, he had woven himself into the lives of people around him. Alara found him standing near the landing platform with a transport from Earth waited. As usual, he carried very little. A small travel bag rested beside him. A cup of coffee remained in his hand. It seemed impossible that a person whose influence stretched across worlds could depart with so little. "You are leaving early," Alara said. Nathan smiled. "Less traffic." She laughed despite herself. "You know, that does not apply to starships. I like pretending it does." For a moment, they stood together in comfortable silence. Then Alara asked the question she had been considering for days. "Why did Earth send you?" Nathan looked toward the horizon where sunlight touched the distant mountains. "Because you asked for a swordmaster. But you were never really a swordmaster." No, he admitted. Not in the way you expected. Alara nodded. That much was obvious now. She had requested expertise. Earth had sent wisdom. She had asked for skill. They had sent experience. Most importantly, she had asked for someone capable of teaching discipline, and Earth had responded with someone who had spent a lifetime learning it. Did they know I would be disappointed when I first saw you? She asked. Nathan chuckled. Probably. And they sent you anyway. That is usually how the best lessons begin. Alara looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. When you arrived, I thought they had made a mistake. I know. Now I think they understood exactly what they were doing. Nathan's smile widened slightly. That is very kind of you. It is true. The transport crew began preparing for departure. Nearby personnel moved efficiently through final procedures. Yet no one seemed eager to interrupt the conversation. News of Nathan's departure had spread, and many had quietly gathered at a respectful distance. Alara noticed academy instructors, diplomats, maintenance workers, gardeners, administrative staff. People from every level of the palace had come to see him off. Nathan noticed them as well. His expression softened. Good people, he said quietly. They learn a lot from you. Nathan shook his head. No, they reminded me of things I needed to remember. Alara smiled. Even now, he refused to place himself above anyone else. Perhaps that was the secret she had spent weeks trying to uncover. It was not hidden in classified archives or diplomatic records. It was hidden in perspective. Nathan Hale had lived long enough to stop measuring himself against other people. Long enough to stop chasing recognition. Long enough to understand that influence was not something a person collected. It was something earned through service. The boarding signal sounded. Nathan picked up his bag. Take care of your empire, princess. Alara folded her hands behind her back. I will try. Do not try. He smiled warmly. Pay attention. Listen carefully. Help people solve real problems. The rest tends to work itself out. Then he stepped toward the transport. Halfway up the boarding ramp, he paused and looked back one final time. Alara expected a grand farewell, a final piece of wisdom, some unforgettable statement worthy of history. Instead, Nathan simply lifted his coffee cup in a small gesture of appreciation. Moments later, the transport lifted into the morning sky and disappeared among the clouds. Long after it was gone, Princess Alara remained where she stood. She finally understood why so many governments respected him and why powerful leaders still listened when he spoke. Nathan Hale had become the rarest kind of person in the galaxy, a human old enough to refuse power because he had already discovered something more valuable.